articles of impeachment. A second committee on Capitol Hill is set to investigate President Donald Trump. It starts next week. We'll have a preview. A plan of amends. Why the new head of the only diocese in West Virginia asks his predecessor to repay more than $700,000. Christian persecution. A representative from the White House tells us why he's at a conference on helping the faithful in the Middle East. And giving thanks. A Catholic group in the nation's capital serves a holiday meal to the homeless. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, November 27th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi. The House Judiciary Committee takes over the impeachment probe of President Donald Trump. Lawmakers schedule a hearing for next week. They're pushing closer to a vote on possible charges. White House correspondent Mark Irons brings us the story. Mark?
Jason, next week's hearing will feature legal experts examining constitutional questions as the panel will decide if it will write articles of impeachment against President Trump.
They're pushing that impeachment witch hunt, and a lot of bad things are happening to them.
President Trump believes Democrats will pay at the polls for continuing the impeachment probe. The investigation enters a new phase next week. The House Judiciary Committee will take over and decide what, if any, articles of impeachment it will write up against President Trump. The president and his counsel have been invited to attend the hearing and participate. Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, opposes that idea.
I would not tell the president to testify or provide written answers, since on October 8th, his own White House counsel made very clear that we look at this as an unconstitutional and ill-conceived illegal process from the beginning.
At the same time, the president has encouraged key administration officials to testify in the impeachment probe, like Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, though Pompeo isn't saying if he would consider that.
When the time is right, all good things happen.
At the center of the impeachment investigation, questions about why U.S. military aid was withheld from Ukraine. The hold came at the same time President Trump was pressuring Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden and his son Hunter. The president denies a quid pro quo, but some impeachment witnesses testified they believe the president withheld aid money until Ukraine announced investigations.
The president's got to come to Congress if he's going to hold up money for any reason and explain why there's a public interest to do so. But they just went ahead and held this up for the president's personal political scheming.
The White House did ultimately release nearly $400 million in aid money to Ukraine, but that did not happen, we're learning today, until reportedly after President Trump became aware that a government whistleblower had filed a complaint. Jason?
Okay, White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thanks, Mark. And joining me now to offer his take is John Gizzi. He's the chief political columnist and White House correspondent for Newsmax. John, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
So, Judiciary Chairman Nadler has invited the White House, invited President Trump to attend next week's session and even possibly question witnesses. What do you make of that? What are you hearing at the White House?
It's on the fast track to impeach the president. The White House believes that, and most in Congress who are around believe that. There was talk of just a censure of the president after, but even members who pushed that went back to the I word, impeachment. Betting is strong at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. There will be a vote to impeach by Christmas and a trial beginning in January. Now, how long that trial goes on and who the players are as the articles of impeachment are presented and just what articles there are, that remains to be seen.
And just to remind our audience that what happens is the House brings those charges. If they
Exactly.
vote, that's pretty much equivalent to bringing the charges, and then the Senate's the one that will vote. They have the trial whether to convict, and then that would, if the Senate did, which is very unlikely, the GOP Senate, to remove the president if they voted to convict him.
Exactly. Just remember, impeachment is like indictment by a grand jury, and the Senate trial is the full trial for the president.
So do you think that the White House, do you think President Trump's actually going to attend? They were invited by Chairman Nadler to attend some of these hearings. Do you think they're going to show up on Capitol Hill?
I wouldn't put it past the president. You know, Andrew Johnson, the first president ever to be impeached, when he saw that impeachment was inevitable, said to the House, impeach and be damned. In other words, he was not going to care what they would do, and he would say exactly what he want. Now, smarter heads around him, cooler heads, said don't testify. I think the president right now, based on what he says to my colleagues and me, wants very much to go in and testify, and if it comes to a trial, would not be adverse to testifying before the Senate itself.
Maybe testifying in the House, just written testimony, maybe not in person?
Right now, again, I take the president at his word, and he sounds like someone who's willing to go in and take questions. He does pretty well with the television medium, better than answering in writing, I think, and he's probably leaning in that direction.
He seems to be distancing himself a little bit from his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. What are you making of this? He had a radio interview, and he kind of seemed to contradict some of earlier words from Mayor Giuliani. What do you make of this?
He goes back and forth with Giuliani. On October 10th, he told me outside the Marine One helicopter, I haven't spoken to him, I haven't asked him, and he was putting himself at distance from the former New York mayor and his friend. Now, I will say that in the last 24 hours, talk has resumed that former Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina, who chaired the Benghazi Committee, will be in the Trump legal circle come January. That's when the ban on his involvement in dealing with members of Congress ends under the ethics laws he lives under as a former member of Congress. And the president noted this. There's been radio silence about Trey Gowdy for the past month. But now talk is starting to begin again, and come January, he's a free agent to do what he wants for the president before Congress.
Trey Gowdy, former prosecutor, he led the Benghazi Commission for the Republicans. What is he going to bring to that team?
Well, this is it. I interviewed him when he was first nominated for Congress, defeating an incumbent in the primary in 2010. He wanted nothing more than to prosecute, gave up a very successful private practice to be an assistant U.S. attorney under Bill Clinton, I might add, a Democrat. And then in Congress, he is focused very hard on investigations and, as you say, on the Benghazi Committee. He is a junkyard dog when it comes to these investigations, and he's someone the president is comfortable with. Giuliani, I must say, has not performed well, other than being the president's TV lawyer, and there's been criticism about it. I think of what the Roman historian Tacitus once said about an undistinguished emperor. He would have been splendid if he never held the position.
Of course, John Gizzi is going to quote Tacitus. Thank you so much for being with us, John Gizzi from Newsmax. Thanks for your time.
Happy Thanksgiving to all.
And the Bishop of Wheeling-Charleston, Mark Brennan, wants the former bishop to pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, this follows a series of allegations against Michael Bransfield. At the request of Pope Francis, Bishop Brennan of West Virginia releases a plan of amends for disgraced Bishop Bransfield. It calls for Bransfield to pay the diocese back more than $792,000 and apologize to those he was accused of sexually harassing and intimidating. Bishop Bransfield submitted his letter of resignation to Pope Francis last year after reaching the mandatory age of retirement, 75. He had served the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston for 13 years. Pope Francis accepted it. In July, the Pope said former Bishop Bransfield may no longer reside in the diocese he used to lead or participate in any public celebration of the liturgy, and that he must make amends for some of the harm he caused. Yesterday's statement from Bishop Brennan requesting apologies and repayment of funds, it aligns with the Pope's decree and with church investigations this year.
The investigation, which I was asked to conduct on behalf of the Holy See, determined that the allegations of sexual harassment of adults by Bishop Bransfield are credible.
West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey sued Bransfield and the diocese, alleging covering up criminal behavior. Morrisey says it is time for the diocese to truly come clean and begin to put this horrific scandal behind it. Church leaders vow to stay vigilant.
We will not relent in our determined efforts to bring about the reform and renewal of the church and to restore the credibility, confidence, and trust of the faithful.
And that was Archbishop Lori, but Bishop Brennan says the money Bransfield would pay back would be used for counseling for abuse victims. Bransfield says he did nothing wrong. 75,000 Catholics live in the Wheeling-Charleston Diocese. It includes 95 parishes in West Virginia. More dead after yesterday's earthquake. The death toll in Albania rises to 28 people. Rescuers are racing to find survivors in the rubble. More than 650 people were injured in the 6.4 magnitude quake. It's the country's second largest city. Residents slept in tents, cars, and at a soccer stadium. Powerful aftershocks rumbled through the night. Hong Kong police say they're getting ready to end a 10-day siege on a college campus. But first, they're clearing out hazardous materials like Molotov cocktails.
We adopt a peaceful method and flexible approach to solve the problem. Our ultimate goal is to restore the safety of the campus and to reopen the campus as soon as possible.
Police say they're gathering evidence and getting rid of stockpiles of dangerous things. The university says many labs and other buildings you can see on the campus had been vandalized. Some chemicals and dangerous goods are still missing. Iran's supreme leader says recent protests over government-set gasoline prices are part of a conspiracy involving the United States. A lawmaker says police arrested more than 7,000 people, and one report claims protesters tried to take over Iranian state TV. Supporters and opponents of Lebanon's President spar. The overnight fights injured dozens of people. Police arrested at least 16. The protests began last month. They were mostly peaceful until recent days. Tempers grow as the political deadlock for forming a new government drags on. A United Nations report says South Sudan's National Security Service recruited 10,000 fighters. If true, it would break a peace deal negotiated last year. The truce ended a 5-year civil war. Nearly 400,000 people died in that war. The UN report says South Sudan's government has shown little interest in following the spirit of the compromise. Last year, Pope Francis begged the country's leaders to continue the peace deal. He also says he hopes to visit South Sudan in 2020. The bishops of New Jersey and Pennsylvania this week visit the Vatican. They're making their 5-year reports to the Holy Father. The bishops were rocked hard over the past 2 years. Now, that included revelations of abuse laid out in the Pennsylvania grand jury report and the ongoing investigation into former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick.
And to make it through that experience, the Lord Jesus encouraged us to develop habits of endurance, which means putting up with difficult things. I think we have an experience of that today. A habit of courage, meaning not to be afraid in the face of horrible possibilities even, and tenacity, to be stubbornly faithful. That's how the Lord Jesus invites us to respond to the kind of horrors that he described in this particular gospel passage.
Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia preached today at the Papal Basilica of St. Paul. And he reflected on today's gospel. It shows Jesus teaching that Christians will be greatly tested in their faith. Pope Francis appoints an auditor and Italian banking consultant as president of the Vatican's internal financial watchdog. EWTN Rome Bureau Chief Alan Holdren tells us more from Rome.
Carmelo Barbagallo is a consultant in the areas of banking and financial supervision. He was previously head of the Banking and Financial Supervision Department of the Bank of Italy. Today's appointment comes as the Vatican's financial watchdog is struggling to assert its credibility. The previous president of the Financial Information Authority, or AIF, wasn't renewed in his mandate when it expired last week. Shortly thereafter, a member of the AIF board resigned and told the Associated Press the authority had been effectively rendered an empty shell and that there was no point in remaining involved in its work. The fallout stems from an October 1st raid on the offices of the Secretary of State and the AIF as part of a corruption investigation by Vatican prosecutors into a London real estate venture. Subsequently, a total of 5 employees and officials were suspended and blocked from entering the Vatican. That included Tommaso Di Ruzza, the director of the AIF. Yesterday, on the flight back from Tokyo to Rome, Pope Francis confirmed that Di Ruzza is still suspended. The AIF was established by Pope Benedict XVI in 2010 to oversee suspicious financial transactions, and it's charged with ensuring that Vatican banking activities comply with international financial standards. In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, President Donald Trump sends a message to a conference focused on ending the persecution of Christians. Today is the second day of the International Conference on Christian Persecution. It's being held in Budapest, Hungary. President Donald Trump sent a special envoy to the conference. He brought a message of support for persecuted Christians. U.S. Presidential Assistant Joe Grogan joins us now from Budapest. Thanks for being with us. Now, the president repeated his commitment to persecuted Christians. What is the Trump administration doing to help them?
Well, you're exactly right. I delivered a letter from the President of the United States and read it before the 600 people that were assembled in spillover rooms, reiterating this president's commitment and the commitment of the United States to fight for religious freedom and fight against religious persecution, and to commend Hungary for hosting the second international conference on Christian persecution. President Trump is deeply invested in this issue, and in September he was the first U.S. president to ever host a meeting at the United Nations with leaders from all over the world on religious persecution. And as domestic policy advisor, I work on religious liberty in the United States and closely with our national security team on issues of religious persecution and freedom internationally. We work very well together, and there's a ton of good, solid work that this administration is doing.
And right now you're in Hungary, you're hearing from all of these attendees, you're speaking yourself. What are the persecuted Christians telling you? What do they need? What do they want to see from the U.S. government right now?
Well, the first thing that is very striking to me is how many people approach me and thank the United States, thank President Trump for leading on this issue and speaking out about religious persecution against Christians, against Jews, against Muslims, against Yazidis. Anywhere people are persecuted, that is offensive to the President of the United States, and he's been very, very vocal about combating it and making sure that people have the freedom to worship God as they choose and just live in peace. So the first thing that strikes me is people from Asia, Africa, all over Europe, the Middle East especially, thanking the President of the United States for leading on this issue, speaking out on this issue, and really giving hope to people out there to get more governments invested in the idea of fighting Christian persecution. The other thing that's striking is how relieved they are that people are finally talking about it. We lose 4,000 Christians a year to murder due to religious persecution. I mean, that's over 10, 11, 12 a day in some instances. Some of the horrific crimes you hear about and the suffering that people undergo who want to worship Jesus Christ is just tremendously heartbreaking. And the other thing that's noteworthy is there's people from a variety of different Christian faiths. I mean, Hungary is a predominantly Catholic country, but there's plenty of Protestants here, evangelicals, Baptists, Americans, people across the spectrum, liberal and conservative. But also I had a great conversation with a Muslim cleric today, a Jewish cleric the day before, and there are people from different faiths here who want the United States to lead on religious persecution and want Christianity to survive and flourish in the Middle East, because a flourishing Christianity is good for all religious people of goodwill and good faith. And so there is a tremendous amount of need and a tremendous amount of gratitude that people are paying attention to this issue.
And the conference then is going to come to an end tomorrow. What do you expect is going to actually come from your meeting, from hearing all those discussions you just mentioned?
Well, the first thing, I think that this is really going to generate more excitement and interest in the subject and more activities. We're partnering through USAID with Hungary to help rebuild Christian communities in Iraq. There's a lot of work being done in Syria. There's work being done in Africa to protect Christian communities. The more we can speak about this issue, the more we'll get governments invested, NGOs will get invested in it, and private citizens as well can get out and fight religious persecution. And I think, this conference has doubled in size from 2 years ago. I think in the conversations I had with the government today, I told them they're going to need to find a bigger venue because there were over 600 people here today, but I bet you they double in size again in a couple of years at least, because the energy, the excitement, the enthusiasm here is just so palpable, and it's a pleasure to be a part of on behalf of the President of the United States.
Okay, well, Joe Grogan, when you come back, please come visit us in the studio. We can talk more about what you learned there in Hungary. Joe Grogan, Assistant to the President of the United States and the Director of the Domestic Policy Council. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, and happy Thanksgiving.
Up next, Pope Francis reveals the highlights of his two-nation trip to Asia and a Catholic angle on the Thanksgiving holiday.
Ayer regresé del viaje apostólico en Tailandia y en Japón.
Pope Francis reflects on the highlights of his just completed trip to Thailand and Japan. He's back at the Vatican, speaking at his weekly address to pilgrims. The Holy Father calls citizens of Bangkok people with the beautiful smile, and he highlighted the motto of his visit to Tokyo, protect all life. And a special feast for the homeless and those in need. Catholic Charities DC hosted the Thanksgiving meal. The dinner, now in its 6th year, highlights Catholic Charities DC's efforts to fight hunger in the region. Let's talk about this event and serving the community. We're joined by Msgr. John Enzler, President and CEO of Catholic Charities DC. Msgr, welcome back.
Nice to be here. Thank you so much.
This meal is incredible. You lay out the white tablecloth. I mean, tell us why this meal is so important for DC.
Well, we have a regular Wednesday night dinner, and we have it called St. Maria's Meals. And we do it, and we have about 150 people come. It's wonderful, but there's no place to sit down. They get the hot food, which is great, but there's no place to really be, if you will, like a family. This last night, we do it every year for the last 7 years at the Edison Center at Pepco. They all can sit down. Actually, there's 2 servings, 2 sittings, because so many people come. And it's turkey. It's everything we have at home. It's turkey, it's stuffing, it's potatoes, it's plenty of greens, it's pumpkin pie. It's beautiful.
It's wonderful, and this is something that touches these clients that have come out. Some of them St. Maria's Meals every week. They have that nice, delicious meal. But this one, sit down, fancy, all the trimmings, everything ready to go for Thanksgiving.
They actually start calling us sometime early November. What's the date of that? And yesterday the line was about almost 250 people long. We served 300 people, but 250 people on. Some were there as early as noon for a 5 o'clock dinner. I mean, it's that important to them to make sure they get in. Enjoy it.
So Thanksgiving, and the Tuesday after Thanksgiving is always this Giving Tuesday.
Exactly.
How important is that for Catholic Charities in DC, and then also Catholic Charities across the country as well?
Well, across the country, of course, Catholic Charities is huge. Actually, the budget is $4.3 billion across the country. But here, our budget is almost $100 million, which is great. But there's so much need. Food insecurity is a huge problem in the city. And so St. Maria's Meals serves about 32,000 people, actually 20,000 people a year. And our SHARE program, which is nutritious, affordable food, serves about 30,000. We did 2.5 million meals last year. The reality is that food insecurity is a big problem. In Prince George's County, where you live, basically, I think it's about 31,000 children go to bed hungry. Imagine, this is Washington, D.C. And so it is a big issue. And we got to find a way, particularly for the children, to make sure they don't go to bed hungry. So we continue to work. Now, there's something called a virtual food drive, which is a fun thing. We're just doing it. It supports a lot of our food programs. And it's a way to, if you want to support that, it's www.catholiccharitiesdc.org. Go on the website, and you'll see how you can do a virtual gift through different charities that take care of food insecurity.
And as Catholics are thinking about ways to give back, end of the year as well, thinking about also giving, what ways can Catholics, what advice do you have for Catholics that want to serve in the community right now?
We have many, many opportunities. We have 56 different programs. It's homeless shelters, it's medical, dental clinics, it's work with people who are abused, people who are refugees, people who are basically being trafficked. It's across the board. So if you want to do that, again, on our website, go on the website, you'll see all these opportunities to get involved. We have a whole volunteer committee, a group that works with volunteers. We love volunteers. We have 7,000 volunteers. Wow. We want to have 15,000.
Yeah, you can always use more volunteers.
So come on, we love them.
And wherever they're listening, whether it's in California or New York, there's other places.
167 Catholic Charities across the country. So basically, you can volunteer any place. you live, I guarantee Catholic Charities has a way to do that.
As we come to the Thanksgiving table tomorrow, and as we are so thankful for all the blessings that God has given us, what advice do you have for Catholics as they come together and celebrate?
Well, for me and for everybody, I think it's a time to slow down. While it's not a Christian holiday or a religious holiday, it is a religious holiday. Because I love to start my day with the Eucharist, with lots of our parish gathered around. I encourage people to do that. If you can tomorrow, go to church. If you can, start your day at the Lord's altar, and then go home and have a spectacular dinner and watch some football, enjoy yourself. But that's important, I think, to put it in the context of prayer. And then, just stop and think how blessed we are. All of us are so blessed. Not everybody has the same gifts that I've been blessed with, but in terms of blessing, that's so many things. But everybody should realize how blessed they are. It's time to stop and say thank you.
Say thank you. And I know you mentioned football. I know that's one of the passions as well that you have. So thank you very much, Msgr John Enzler. Thanks for being with us from Catholic Charities, D.C. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Can't wait for Thanksgiving. We thank you now for watching tonight. And for the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Jason Calvi. There will be special programming the rest of the week. And we'll be back on Monday, though, with more news from a Catholic perspective. And for those in the United States, we hope you have a blessed Thanksgiving with family and friends. Good night, and God bless.